I love that image, though, of destruction to sanctification.
Yeah.
And what popped into my head when you said that was, and we're speaking of trauma, in some ways, if we can skip around a little bit and go right to kintsugi,
Yeah.
Which seems to me about a certain physical trauma going to something that is whole again. Can you tell us what that is?
Kintsugi is a venerable art form or tea tradition that takes broken vessels, teaware, and mends them to make new. Now, we in the West have no concept of this. We break something, we throw it away, buy a new one, right? That's what I would do. But I learned in Japan, this came out in 16th century, 17th century Japan, connected with this tea tradition of Senno Rikyu, who was a tea master in 16th century Japan, who at the time of feudal wars created this art form of peace. It is a gesture of peace to create a little tea house, which you have one-to-one time with the tea master. He intentionally created these, it got smaller and smaller, and instructed his disciples. There were 7 main key disciples. 5 of them were baptized Christians. So that tells you something about this movement. Rikyu was instrumental in everything that we know about Japanese aesthetic, including the concept of wabi, sabi, tsuki, all these concepts that we go back to and look at Japanese art and say, wow, this is a remarkably deep integration. And so out of that tradition, kintsugi, the word wasn't coined probably until 50 to 100 years later after Rikyu's death. He was forced to commit suicide, harakiri ritual, because he opposed the shogun's invasion into Korea. So this is rich conversation. We can talk about this all day. But kintsugi in itself captures this idea that when we are broken and when things are broken around us, what do we do? Do we pretend that it never happened? Do we build it up so that we can forget the past? Or do we actually highlight and accentuate the fractures so they become a landscape, a river of gold? So kintsugi master will not only mend so that you can use the bowl again with Japan lacquer, urushi, but he or she will add gold to not only beautify the fractures, but they're often adding design. So the resulting kintsugi bowl is more valuable than the original, however honored and valuable that may have been. You know, Jesus, after he suffered for us, and died, he could have resurrected as anything, right? I mean, this is God. So he came back as a human being after all that he's been through.
As one
I wouldn't do that. Like, I want to forget about it. You know, I want to come back as some other thing. You know, but not only he came back as a glorified human being, he came back as a wounded, glorified.
Yeah.
What does that say about us, the fractures and trauma that we go through in life? And when kintsugi master takes these fragments, he will often behold the fragments for many years before attempting to mend it.
Wow.
Sometimes kintsugi master will give it back to the family of tea masters because he or she feels that it's not ready to be mended.
Wow.
And the family of tea masters hold on to those fragments for several generations before they decide it's time to give it to the kintsugi master of that day and that it can be mended. What does Jesus' wounds, post-resurrection appearance, tell us about the new creation. It at least tells us that our wounds matter, that what we go through on this side of eternity to God is not insignificant, that everything that we go through in this side is connected to the other side. Now, there's much more to be told from that portal, that little pinhole.
And made more beautiful.
And made more beautiful. So it is through his wounds we are healed. And to me, kintsugi captures so much of Christian theology without perhaps being conscious of it. And so part of what we do with my bride and I starting kintsugi or Academy Kintsugi experiences is for anyone to be able to, in 3 hours, be able to capture the sense of that beholding time and to slow down, to see fractures as an entry point, brokenness as a new beginning. And we have remarkable stories coming out of many of the workshops, but we relaunched it in September the 11th, 2021. Because of what I was going through in my trauma, I really needed to reframe that day. So to me, 9/11 is a kintsugi day.
We've been through
Yeah.
a collective trauma.
Yes.
You have any thoughts on our ability to, because also to your point, we want to get it done with,
Right.
or not even acknowledge
right.
that it's there.
Yeah, kintsugi. What's interesting is when we do kintsugi experiences, we ask people to bring pieces that they have memories attached to. The more personal, the better. That has been broken or something that you couldn't throw away. Those are very powerful to share and to bring. But many people, like I thought, there's no way I can come up with 12 broken things in my house, right? And so I'm looking around cupboards and shelves, and I'm like, I can't find anything. Maybe I have to break, something, which we're now with Academy Kintsugi, we're like, please don't break anything because we have enough broken things in the world. But the part of Academy Kintsugi journey is that you open your heart to brokenness. We think everything we have is perfect, but it's actually not. When you train your ear, you can hear the coffee mug with a hairline fracture, when you pour your coffee. But we don't notice it.
Right.
Because we are trained not to think about that, right? Just like you're saying, this culture trains us to, just forget about it, throw it away and buy a new one.
Right.
So in my case, I was lamenting, I don't know if I can find something, and my assistant says, hey, do you know you have like a bag full of broken things in the studio? I'm like, what?
Who's been saving those?
Well, he brought out this bag that I received, and I didn't even look inside. It was from my mother, who passed away. And we had to move her things, and we didn't know where to put them, so they were in the studio just sitting there. And she, a Japanese woman, grew up during the war, does not throw away anything. So I literally had 3 bags of broken pieces of pottery.
Oops.
I know. And so I went to the first kintsugi experience, and my rector was with us, and I gave a piece without telling him that it was my mother's to him to mend. And it was so moving to me because it was a process of communal, healing of bringing something that I didn't even know that I had, brokenness that I didn't know that I had.
When you talk in the book about the theology of making, could you say something about that?
Theology of Making is radical orthodoxy of going back to Genesis and looking at it from verse 1 of Genesis. You have this creator God who's an artist. Now, we have made God into a CEO, God into this industrial lord, all sorts of things. But no, this is biblical. It's not. I'm not creating a subcategory of theology here.
I don't know.
This is, the way that this creator God, who is the artist, who is the only artist in my mind, only true artist, and we were created out of this love, and yet we have walked away from it, and therefore, what happens then? Kintsugi happens, right? Basically, well, Jesus comes and lives that life that we should live, but we cannot because of our fallenness, and then all of a sudden, Jesus suffers because of that. Brokenness happens. We experience that curse of brokenness every day. And yet, God says, no, that's not the end. That's the beginning of the story. So the resurrection, we have, of course, focused on the cross and the resurrection as a central thesis, and we should. But that's just part of the story. The resurrection, Easter morning, is the beginning of this new creation. And Jesus came not only to proclaim, right, the reparative, fixing of the brokenness, but he came to announce that he is the Lord of new creation. That's why he turns water into wine. And invites us to drink it. And invites us to make some more. And he says, I'm not going to show up until you make some more wine so I can be there at Eucharist.
Right.
I'm going to wait until you make. And this is remarkable to me. Like God could skip that step.
Right.
But God said, no, I made you into mini creators, artists with a small a. And how are you creating? What are you making in faith? So that I can multiply that and bring that into new creation. So everything that I seriously believe that every painting, stroke that I make is done literally with Christ's tears. And though that stroke, if I can be focused on giving this back to God fully with my faith, mustard seed of faith, then that will become this entire multiverse in the new creation. Think about that. That's staggering, but that to me is what the gospel is saying.
Yeah. There's like a capital T truth in that.
Yeah.
Wow. I got it. So in the book you talk about making and the Genesis making God as artist, that creativity and imagination are what separates us from all the rest of creation, as it were. What do we do with that?
The challenge, of course, whenever I say that promise of new creation is embedded in everything that we do. By the way, it's not just strokes of creating beauty, but it's the strokes of giving mercy, providing justice. All these things are faith, mustard seeds of faith that God can multiply into the new creation in ways that we cannot possibly understand today. But imagination is suspect in the church and in our culture. We say, well, you're imagining things, right? As if it's a fantasy to be avoided. But without imagination, we cannot utter a word. Without imagination, we cannot see. We're actually constructing as we see, and our brain is processing, and that is directly tied to our imagination. And brain is part of the brain. The eye is part of the brain. So what we see is directly tied to the deepest realm of thinking. But we don't train ourselves that way, and we haven't done well to cultivate the sanctification of imagination. And so we let the world, the consumer world of media, dictate how our imagination is to be trained.
And to what ends it is to serve.
That's right. That's right. And the church's number one job is to create a portal into sanctifying our imagination. It's very much like what I had to do after 9/11, painting flames over and over until it became sanctifying flames. And that work continues, and the church's job is to reframe how we have been forced to see imagination as not only suspect but detriment. You cannot have conspiracy theories without active imagination.
Right.
Because we ignored this important step of discipleship in the church, we have so many Christians who think in fantasy and think that is real. So that, for me, that is an indictment against what I do as an artist, because it is something that's my job, is to help people understand that through art, music, theater, dance, cinema, that we can help people to become fully-orbed imaginators who see every creation, every making as a seed of faith that can help others to open their imagination. Right? Like Narnia Chronicles, like Tolkien, these people in the past, we need them now.